Hello and welcome to Social 30-1, the greatest course ever. So this is the video for lesson 1 of unit 1. And so if you're watching this video, I'm guessing you probably missed out on this day of class, and so you need to catch up. So you can watch this video, and while you were watching this video, you're going to want to, nope, not that. You're going to want to follow along in your partial notes. There we go. So you should have received some partial notes from me. If you did not, these partial notes are posted in D2L, and if you have a printer at home, you can print them out. Otherwise, you can come and talk to me, and I can give you a copy of these partial notes. As you are watching the video, you are going to fill in the blanks. You're going to kind of complete these partial notes with information that you learn about as you are watching the videos. Or if you're in class, you're going to complete them using information that you get in class. Okay, so Social 30-1. So you're going to see in the top-ish left corner of your partial notes, it says Social 30 issue, which basically means like the Social 30 question we're going to try to answer throughout this course. What is the Social 30 issue? Well, before we talk about the Social 30 issue, remember Social 10, right? The issue for Social 10 was, to what extent should we embrace globalization, right? And then Social 20 was, to what extent should we embrace nationalism? Well, now Social 30, what is the issue? It is, to what extent should we embrace an ideology? So just beside your the words Social 30 issue, right beside there, you can write the question, to what extent should we embrace an ideology? All right, so that's something you can go ahead and do. And throughout this lesson, if ever you see words that are written in green, those are words that you need to write down in your notes. All right, only the green stuff. All the other colors, you don't need to worry about them. You don't need to write them down. You can just read them and learn from them. That's all. Okay, so before we get into this first lesson, I'm going to get you to do a little personal questionnaire. So in your partial notes, you'll notice that the personal questionnaire is over here on the left side towards the bottom, and it gives you space to answer each of these questions directly onto your paper. So I'm going to get you to pause the video and take a few minutes to answer each of these questions. You are not going to hand these answers in to me. All right, so you don't need to worry about, writing something that you don't want me to read because this is for you. It's a personal questionnaire. So go ahead, pause this video and do your personal questionnaire now. Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your little questionnaire. Now we're going to get into Unit 1. Unit 1 is all about ideologies, right? And the first part of Unit 1, you guessed it, is called Lesson 1. Lesson 1 is going to focus on two different things, individualism and collectivism. But before we can do that, we must talk about this word. This word is ideology. All right, so ideology, you can write it here. See this sort of oval shaped thing over here on your paper? You can write the word ideology inside of that. And we're going to talk about the definition of ideology. What is an ideology? Well, it is a system of thought. It's based on beliefs and values. And a person's ideology explains how they think the world should work. And it also explains how a person thinks people should live together in society, right? So some people's ideologies say that, people should live a certain way in society. And, another person could have a different ideology and they say, no, society should work like this. People should behave this way and interact with each other in this way, right? So there are lots of different ideologies because people have different beliefs, people have different values and different ideas about how the world should be organized and how it should work. But all ideologies try to explain certain things. What do they try to explain? Well, the nature of humanity. So some people, their ideologies put a lot of faith in humanity, right? Some people think that humans are very good and capable of governing themselves and capable of making decisions for themselves. Well, then they're going to have a more democratic ideology, right? But some people think, hey, you know what? people are not to be trusted. People are naturally very bad. Well, then those types of people, their ideology might include having a very strong government with a lot of rules in place to maintain order in society. And different ideologies try to explain their interpretations of the past, right? So your understanding of history is going to dictate the type of ideology you have. And also it's going to give you a different vision for the future, right? So different ideologies have different visions for what the future should look like, right? So some ideologies, they say, okay, we think the future should look like this. This is how society should be organized in the future. But then different ideologies will say, no, we think this is a better vision for the future, right? This is how people should operate in the future. And different ideologies have different roles for the government, right? Some ideologies say the government should be very involved in people's lives and should have a lot of control over the people who live in a society. Whereas other ideologies say, no, 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 the government should be very limited and should allow people to have a lot of freedoms. Okay, so remember your personal questionnaire. I'm sure you remember it like it was just yesterday. Well, the personal questionnaire talks about a lot of different things that influence a person's ideology, right? It asks you about your family, your culture, language, news, media, gender, religion. These are different things that shape our identities, but also shape our ideologies, right? So we're going to look at factors that influence a person's ideology. First one is family, and you can write this in your partial notes. So your family is going to pass down a lot of things to you. Your family is going to shape your beliefs. Your family is going to shape your values, or at least have an impact on them. And as a result, it's going to impact how you think society should be organized. Right? Also, culture. Right? Some cultures really value cooperation and working together. Well, then that's going to give you an ideology that says that society should be organized in a way that people cooperate with each other and work together a lot. Whereas other cultures are more cultures that really value personal freedoms and individualism. And so people in those cultures are going to have more individualist ideologies. Also, language, right? Different languages have different views of the world, right? Different languages have different words for different things, and that's going to shape people's ideologies. Or the media, right? So if you follow the news, well, an important question I have for you is, how do you get your information? What sources of information do you have? And the news media, in many situations or in many contexts, can try to influence your ideology, right? So some news media will try to make you see the world a certain way. It will try to influence the way you vote, right? And so in the United States, we have media companies such as Fox and CNN, and a lot of people see these media companies as being sort of, ideologically driven, that they have a desire to try to get their viewers to take on certain ideologies. And some people would say that in Canada, some of our media companies do similar things, right? Some of our media companies are a little bit more left-wing, some of them are a little bit more right-wing. Some of them try to do a good job of trying to include many different perspectives from many different people. And so depending on which media company gives you your news, you could have a different influence on your ideology. Next, we have relationship to land, right? So different people have different relationships to the land, and that's going to influence their ideologies, right? So here we have pictures of people whose relationship to the land is very much one in which we use the land to give us resources that we can use as humans, right? So farmers use the land to produce food that we eat. And then here we see some guys who are working in the energy industry, and they're extracting fossil fuels in order to sell it for a profit, right? And so For these people, the relationship to land is, we got to, use natural resources to benefit humanity, right? And that's going to shape their ideology. Whereas other groups of people have a different relationship with the land. You can pause the video and you can read this quote, and it gives you an idea of how some people have a relationship to the land in which we are connected to the land. The land is not meant to be used more than it should be, and we must preserve the land in the way that it is. And so different people are going to have different perspectives on how to treat nature based on the relationship to land. Okay, next, gender, right? So based on, depending on a person's gender, they might have different ideology, right? And your gender can definitely impact your ideology, or your religion, or your spirituality. If you belong to a religious group that says that it's very important to share and to help the less fortunate, well, then that's going to probably give you an ideology where you think that it's important that we share and help the less fortunate, right? It's going to influence who you are. Okay, so all of that was on the first page of your partial notes. You can now turn the page in your partial notes and you can take a look at this. So here we have, what do you call this? A personality test? Yeah, I think this is a personality test. And so on the left side, we have all of these different statements. There are 20 different statements, and there's a blank space in each statement. And in this blank space, you need to write the word often, sometimes, or rarely. Choose one of those words to fill in the blank based on your personality. Okay, so look at the first one. I, blank, feel that most things run better if they are planned by a team of people rather than by one person. Okay, do you often think that? Do you sometimes think that? Or do you rarely think that? So for each of these 20 sentences, write down the word that fits your personality. And then for each sentence, you're going to use this assessment guide. Okay, so for number one, if you chose often, then you give yourself the letter C. For number two, if you chose often, well, then you give yourself the letter I, right? Whereas if you chose sometimes, you give yourself a question mark. If you chose rarely, you give yourself the letter C, okay? And you tally all of these scores in this chart down here. So the total number of C's, total number of question marks, total number of I's, all right? So I'm gonna get you to pause this video and complete this questionnaire, or sorry, complete this personal survey right now. Okay, welcome back. So you learned a little bit about yourself, I hope. I hope you have a number of C's, number of question marks, and number of I's. So it might not be any surprise to you, but the letter C stands for a certain word. Let's find out. Well, let's go through all this. Okay, turn the page to your ideological spectrum, and you're going to see that this is your spectrum. So we have the line, a horizontal line. This is called a spectrum. On the left side of the spectrum, we have a group of people holding hands. On the right side of the spectrum, we have one person all by themselves. Well, this is your ideological spectrum. So different ideologies can be placed on this spectrum. Some ideologies go way over here on the left side of the spectrum. Some ideologies go over here on the right side of the spectrum, but most ideologies are somewhere in between. Okay? And so ideologies that fit on the left side of the spectrum are very collectivist. You can write the word collectivism on the left side. And ideologies that go on the right side of the spectrum are very individualist. So you can write the word individualism on the right side of the spectrum. Oops. All right, so if you did your personality quiz and for the most part, you had more C's than you had question marks or I's, well, that might mean that you might be a collectivist. Whereas if your personality quiz taught you that you have a lot of letter I's, well, then you might be more of an individualist. If you have a lot of question marks, well, then maybe you don't really know. And I guess that's the purpose of this course, is to help you understand whether you are more of a collectivist or more of an individualist, right? And help you decide which ideologies are better collectivist ideologies, or individualist ideologies. So take a look at a quote from this guy. Is his ideology more individualist or collectivist? He says, Aboriginal worldviews teach that everyone and everything is part of a whole, and each is interdependent with all the others. Each person has a right to a personal identity as a member of a community, but also has a responsibility to other life forms and to the ecology of a whole. It is inconceivable that a human being can exist without a relationship with the keepers of the life forces, an extended family, or his or her wider kin, which means, wider family. Okay, is this person more of an individualist or more of a collectivist? This person's more of a collectivist, and the ideology he's describing is a very collectivist ideology. Take this next person, Margaret Thatcher. She was Prime Minister of Britain in the 1980s. She said there is no society. There are only individuals and families. Well, this shows that she is more of an individualist, right? So her ideology fits more on the right side of the spectrum, whereas the first gentleman, his ideology fit more on the left side of the spectrum. Okay, does that make sense? So you are going to want to try to understand where you fit on the spectrum, right? And in order to help you do that, I've got some sentences here. So on the left side, this statement says, the group or collective is important and more valuable than a single individual. That's something that a collectivist would say. Whereas on the right side, it says, individuals are important and entitled to make decisions. That's something an individualist would say. Which of these two statements do you agree with more? Think about it for a second. Okay, let's see the next one. A collectivist would say, it is important to contribute to the group and to be like the group. Whereas an individualist would say, individuals are unique. Which of these two statements do you agree with more? Next, collectivism would say that the strength of the group relies on the contributions of everyone, and the individual may need to sacrifice. But an individualist would say that individual effort is valued, and each individual should be allowed to develop his or her potential. Which one do you agree with more? Are you more of a collectivist or an individualist? Again, a collectivist would say the group is stronger if it knows what its members think, and privacy, it's not a priority. An individualist would say individuals have the right to privacy and to think freely. Which one do you agree with more? A collectivist would say the entire group is responsible for its members' actions, but an individualist would say the individual is responsible for his or her own actions. Everyone's just responsible for themselves. Okay, which one do you agree with more? A collectivist would say the efforts of the group are most important, and individual efforts may not always be celebrated. But an individualist would say individual should take initiative and value personal achievements. Which one's more important to you? Collectivists would say that cooperation is the best way to succeed, but individualists would say that competition is better because it promotes excellence. Which one is correct, according to you? A collectivist would say the group is responsible for its members' well-being, but an individualist would say that the individual, each individual person, is responsible for his or her own well-being. Which one is right? A collectivist would say that wealth should be shared among people who live in the same country. An individualist would say that private property and individual wealth are more important, that people should be able to keep their own money. Which one do you agree with more? A collectivist would say that the well-being of the group is more important than individual rights, but an individualist would say laws should protect individual rights. Okay, so that's it for those statements. Now think to yourself, which side did you find yourself agreeing with more? It's very normal to sometimes agree with both sides. So that's most of us. Most of us are somewhere between collectivism and individualism. We might be a collectivist in some ways, but an individualist in other ways. That's normal, right? So to help you understand, collectivism and individualism a little bit more. I'm going to go over the principles of collectivism and the principles of individualism. These are also known as the values of collectivism and the values of individualism. So we're going to start off on the individualist side of the spectrum. And so there is an acronym to help you remember these values. And the acronym is PRICES. So this is written in green. So you can go ahead and write this in your partial notes underneath your spectrum. You can write the acronym PRICES. And each of these letters, of course, stands for a certain term. The first one is private property, right? An individualist society usually allows people to have private property. Next is the rule of law. The letter I stands for individual rights and freedoms. The letter C stands for competition. The letter E stands for economic freedom, self-interest, and then we toss in a couple extra just for fun: self-reliance and limited government. So those are the principles of individualism. They are the values of individualism. So you would have written those down in your partial notes, but now what I'm going to get you to do is you can go ahead and grab that big worksheet that I gave you in class. All right, so there's a big worksheet, and on one side of the worksheet, there are the values of individualism, and on the other side of the worksheet, there are the values of collectivism. I want you to go to the individualism side, and you will see that I already wrote each of them in the leftmost column. Now, where it says explain what it is, that's where you need to write down a definition. Okay, and this is your assignment for lesson 1. Well, if you want, you can just take the definitions from me. I'm going to go over each of these definitions here. As I show you the definition, you can go ahead and write that definition in this column. Okay, so the first one is private property. I'm about to give you the definition. You can write it here. Right, so here we go. Private property. Those are material possessions, including land, but also other things that are owned by an individual or sometimes by a group of people. Right, so this couple just bought themselves a house. That house is now their private property. And these women are in the mall, and none of them are wearing masks. Oh no, this is pre-COVID, I guess. And here they are off to go get some private property. They're going to go buy things, right? So that is private property. An individualist society allows people to own private property, and private property is an important part of those societies. Next, we have rule of law. So to learn about rule of law, it's nice to go back to the year 1215. So in the year 1215, the King of England was forced to sign something called Magna Carta. And Magna Carta basically meant that the king agreed that he was also subject to the law, that when laws were created, he had to follow those laws too, and that he was not above the law. And from that, we get this concept of rule of law, right? Where the law itself, and not an individual person, has the greatest power, right? So the law is above everything. All individuals are equal before the law, and all individuals are subject to the same law. So it doesn't matter who you are. All people have to follow the same law in any society that promotes the rule of law. Next, we have individual rights and freedoms. So in Canada, which document do we have that guarantees our rights and freedoms? You probably know the answer. It is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Woo! All right, so spend a little time reading it if you want. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a copy in the classroom. You can take a look. These are all of our rights and freedoms. In the United States, they've got one as well, right? It's called the Bill of Rights. And so in their constitution, they have a bunch of amendments to their constitution. Well, the first 10 amendments are their Bill of Rights, in which they include the rights and freedoms of each individual person. And more globally, we have something in the United Nations called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which tries to promote the idea that all humans in every country, no matter who they are, should be given certain rights and freedoms. Okay, and so these are the rights associated with personal liberty, personal freedom, right? And it includes Certain rights and freedoms such as freedom of religion, freedom of association, the right to life, the right to liberty, security of the person. Now, these are individual rights and freedoms, which means that they are something that are included in societies that care about individualism. Okay, next we have competition. Competition is an important part of any individualist society because it allows different companies to compete with each other and also different people to compete with each other. So competition is an incentive for individuals and groups to work harder and more efficiently, right? So the example I give in class is two cell phone companies, right? Apple and Samsung. They are constantly competing with each other. And because they compete with each other, every year they come out with new phones that are better, that are faster, that are more beautiful and can do more things. And they try to do their best to sell these phones at a price that you are willing to pay. If there was only one cell phone company, well, then that one company would not feel motivated to try to create a very good product, right? Because they'd be the only company we could buy from. So they probably would not make very many improvements in technology. And on top of that, they would be able to sell their product for a very, very high price, right? So for that reason, individualists tend to think that competition is a good thing for us because it benefits us, the consumers, the people who buy the products. Next, we have economic freedom, which means that people have freedom to buy things, to sell things as much as they want. If you have money, it's your money, right? Nobody can take it from you, right? And so this is when individuals can act freely as consumers and producers in an economic system, right? The government does not interfere too much. The government gives you freedom to do with your money what you want. If you want to, buy this, you can buy it. Next, self-interest. That is when you are seeking to satisfy your own needs, right? When you care about yourself, when you're focused on making your own life better, when you believe that the world revolves around you, right? So individualists believe that people are motivated to work hard so that they can earn a profit. And by working hard, people end up being very productive and contributing very much to society, right? So we have something called the profit motive. People are motivated to make a profit, and they're motivated to benefit themselves. And by doing so, they make society better. Okay, more on this later in lesson 2. Next, self-reliance, right? So that's when you only rely on yourself, right? You don't rely on other people, right? So individualists believe that people should not rely on others. They should take care of themselves. So I should be able to do things by myself. I should not need other people to take care of me. And I also should not need the government to take care of me. So I can, succeed or fail, but it's all, it's all based on my own talents and merits, right? So there's a great Canadian poet who once said, "Came up, that's all me. Stayed true, that's all me. No help, that's all me for real." And according to this man, he has been self-reliant. He's not dependent on other people. He has, made it to the top, started from the bottom, but, he made it to the top, and he did it all by himself, right? Self-reliant. Next, we have limited government. Individualists do not want governments to interfere in their lives. They want governments to give them space, give them freedom, allow them to live by themselves, right? They would say, government, go away. Let me live my life on my own, right? They want limited government. So individualists believe government should not be heavily involved in society. Instead, governments should be small and allow us to have freedoms. Okay, so there we go. Those were all of the principles of individualism. So you learned about that. Now, for each of these principles of individualism, there is a principle of collectivism that is sort of the collectivist version of it, right? So, for example, private property, this is property that you get to keep. right? Property that belongs to you. Well, the collectivist version of that would be public property, property that belongs to the entire society, right? That is owned collectively by the whole group. And instead of rule of law, collectivists believe we should adhere to social norms. Instead of guaranteeing individual rights and freedoms, collectivists believe in collective responsibility. You must be responsible for others. Instead of competition, collectivists believe in cooperation, working together. Instead of economic freedom, collectivists believe in economic equality. Instead of self-interest, people who are collectivists believe that we should work towards the collective interest, do what's good for all members of society. And instead of focusing on self-reliance, collectivists believe that we should be interdependent, that we should rely on each other, that we should help each other out. And instead of having a limited government, collectivists believe that we should have government intervention. The government should be involved in society to try to make society better. All right, so before we get into collectivism, I'm going to get you to, in a second here, I'm going to get you to pause this video, and you can go back to D2L and you can click on the link for this other video. There's a video of a collectivist tribe. It's also the next video in this playlist. So if it's easier for you to stay in YouTube, you can just click on the next video that is in this playlist. So in this video, there is footage of this very isolated tribe of people who live in this very small island, which is out in the Pacific Ocean. It's they're called Motunui, this village of Motunui. And they live as collectivists, right? They share everything, they work together, cooperate. Society is very equal. There are no rich people, there are no poor people. They all work together. And so you're going to see what it's like. This is very, very rare footage, right, of this tribe. And you're going to see what it's like for them to live together in collectivism, right? So I want you to pause this video and go watch that other video and then come back to this video once you're done the other video, okay? So go ahead and do that now. Welcome back. So you learned a little bit about the people of Motunui, right? And so you saw what it's like for them to live as collectivists, right? They work together, they live together. Everybody depends on each other, and everybody has a role in society to take care of each other. At the same time, do people have very much individual freedom? Not really, right? Do they have a lot of freedom of choice? Can they make many choices for themselves? Not so much. Does anybody have the opportunity to become extremely rich? No, no. Instead, they believe in equality, and everybody works for what they get, but they share everything. Okay, so that's what it looks like to live in a collectivist society. All right. Okay. What's going on? There we go. All right. So let's look at some other collectivist societies that are real and not fictional. Well, the early humans, right? So humans, or Homo sapiens, have existed for about 200,000 years. And throughout most of that history, we have actually lived in pretty small groups of anywhere between 100 and 200 people. And we worked together, and we shared, and we cooperated, and we learned to live and thrive in nature by working together as collectivists. Really, most of our history as humans has been as collectivists. Also, the beginnings of our religion, Christianity, are very collectivist as well. Right? So the early Christians, they shared all things. There were rich people, there were poor people who came together and joined this new religion, but they came together and they shared things amongst themselves. Also, many indigenous societies of North America were very collectivist before the arrival of Europeans and are still very collectivist today. Right? So everyone managed the land, elders would educate, and everyone would look after the children. Right? And so there was a lot of collectivism in these societies. And there are some colonies here in Canada called Hutterite colonies. These are people whose ancestors moved to Canada from Germany back in the day. And they live together, they share everything, they work together. None of them really owns anything, but together they own a lot, right? If that makes any sense. There's a lot of, people have very traditional roles in society, and nobody's poor, right? But nobody's rich either, right? So they have equality in these societies, right? In these Hutterite colonies, you can find them here in Alberta, right? There's one that's only like 40 minutes away from our school, maybe even less. You could drive there, check it out. All right, so let's go through these principles of collectivism now. All right, so in your big worksheet, the real big one, on the back side now, it says value of collectivism. All right, we're going to go through each one of these, and you're going to write down the definition of each one as we learn about it. So public property, right? These are owned by the state or owned by the community, and they're managed according to the best interests of the community. So think about things that no individual person owns, like the school that we learn in, right? This is public property. It's owned by the government, but it's also owned by all of us in a way because it's paid for by our tax dollars. Same with our provincial and national parks. These are not, they don't belong to any individual person. They are owned by the collective. They're owned by us together, right? Also, our, the equipment that the police use, all of our roads, our libraries, our transit system, these are all public property. They are all owned by the collective, and they are used to try to benefit the community. Next, adherence to social norms, right? These are sort of unwritten rules, right? These are rules that we all follow in society because we believe that that's just the best way to live. For example, if you are sitting on the bus and a person, comes onto the bus in a wheelchair, well, the social norm, right, the unwritten rule, the code, says that everybody should give that person some space. If you were sitting in the front of the bus, well, then you should move towards the back and allow the person in the wheelchair to sit in the front, right? And that's something we just do in society because we care about each other. Okay, so these are things that social pressure encourages, right? We have certain societal rules that we all just kind of follow because society says, that's the best way to act, right? And there's all sorts of different ones, right? Respecting your elders, standing for the national anthem, standing for prayer, getting up from your seat for an elderly person, wearing a poppy on Remembrance Day, shaking your opponent's hands after a sports game. These are all social norms that we adhere to, that we follow. Next, we have collective responsibility, right? Holding the whole group responsible for the actions of individuals within the group. Okay, so in a collectivist society, you are not only responsible for your own well-being, you are also responsible for others, right? So think back to the little video you watched. Each person is responsible for working hard to make sure that everybody in the community has what they need to survive. If you don't do your job, if your job is to go and collect the coconuts for everybody in the tribe, and you don't do a good job, well, then people are not going to have enough coconuts, right? Other people are depending on you. So you are responsible towards others. There's also a flip side to this collective responsibility. In some collectivist societies, such as North Korea, collective responsibility can be used in a very negative way. For example, if a person breaks the law or even says something or does something against the government, well, then not only will that one person be punished, but also members of that person's family can be punished. And they are now collectively responsible. And so people can be punished quite severely in this country. Next, we have cooperation, right? What's going to make the dream work? Teamwork, right? And so instead of competing with each other, collectivists believe that we should cooperate, right? So instead of competing with each other in the economy, companies should work together. And that's the best way, according to collectivists. And The goal of a collectivist society is economic equality, right? Instead of economic freedom, where I have the right to become as rich as I want, instead, in a collectivist society, we want people to have equality. In a collectivist society, you don't want anybody to be poor, but that also means that nobody gets to be super rich, right? It means that we look out for each other and help each other to try to narrow the gap between the rich and the poor. So society tries to narrow the gap between rich and poor. And so remember that this is a spectrum, right? So societies that are very, very collectivist will want to have complete equality, and nobody will have any more money than anybody else. Whereas most societies that care about economic equality, they don't want complete equality. Instead, they just don't want some people who have all the money while other people don't have any. And so something that they will use is called tax. The government will collect a lot of money from the rich people and use that money to do things that help the poor people, right? And that narrows the gap between the rich and the poor. Okay, next we have collective interest, right? So instead of doing things out of self-interest, like you would in an individualist society, here, what we do is we try to do things that benefit the collective, try to do things that help everyone, right? So these are goals that all members of a group pursue that benefit the whole group, right? And a classic example would be a labor union, right? So here we have a group of people and they are working hard, they're working together to try to do things that are going to benefit the whole group, right? So they will negotiate with their bosses to try to get better wages for all of them instead of just negotiating for themselves one-on-one. They're going to try to get better work hours for all of them together. Okay, next we have interdependence. This is when people depend on each other. And so we have this very heartwarming photo of people who are relying on each other, you know, lean on me, right? That's the song of interdependence, right? Depend on each other, rely on each other. And then we also have government intervention. Take a look at these people, right? These people are doing some construction work, and as they do it, they have to wear certain things. They're forced to wear a hard hat, a reflective vest, and gloves, right? Who is it that forces these people and these companies to ensure that their workers are wearing these things? It's the government, right? So some people believe that it's important for governments to intervene, right? To step in and get involved in society, in the workplace, or in the economy to try to make life better for people, right? Is life better for these guys because they're wearing safety equipment? Some people would say yes, right? Because it's going to keep them safe, right? And so a collectivist believes that the government needs to play a role in society to try to make sure that life is good for us, right? So the government is involved in society. It regulates people's lives and the economy to promote health, security, and education. Okay, all right, so here we have it. So in a collectivist society, the goal is equality, right? Cooperation, and governments that are very involved. In an individualist society, it's more about personal freedoms and private wealth, being able to make money for yourself. And government does not get very involved. And there's no reason or no need for people to help each other. Instead, you depend on yourself. Okay, so now that you've learned about the values of collectivism and the values of individualism, go back to your big worksheet and you can fill out the columns in the middle and on the right side. So you can fill in all the rest of the blanks. So the next column says why it's an important part of a collectivist or individualist society. So for each of these terms that you just learned, explain how does this value make life better in society? So public property, right? So why is it good to have public property? How does having schools and roads and bridges and public transportation, how do these things make life better for us here in Calgary? Okay, why would collectivists want public property? Okay, and then give some examples. Okay, so for examples, you could write down schools, trains, roads, right? These are all examples of public property. Libraries, right? And you could also include counterexamples if you wanted, right? So a counterexample would be something that is not public property, right? You could say something that is private property if you wanted. Okay. All right. So that's that. Or you could also, for a counterexample, you could explain why society would be less good if we didn't have public property. Okay. All right. So that's what you got to work on now is this big worksheet. This is your lesson 1 assignment is the big worksheet. So you're going to want to get that done, hand it in to me for marks, and ask me for help if you need it. Okay. So have a great day. See you later.